So I went into the GIS and I started just to explore this data. So what I found was that, did the geographic coordinates actually mean anything? Did we need to know anything about these coordinates? Did we need to see them on a map? What was that going to give us? Was that going to give us anything that was useful at all? I actually found, by looking at the data, that the most important spatial consideration for cinema venues was actually their distance and direction from the city centre. That was actually a much more important spatial characteristic of the data rather than where they actually were located on a street. So I used that information instead of the geographic coordinates to represent my data. So I simply had a framework where I would put radial, so our distances from the CBD, and also direction, put all our cinema venues in that, and then it was classified. So I could then say, if one was, say here, I would say that it's in the south-southeast quadrant, and it was 20 to 50 kilometres from the CBD. So then we gave them those classifications instead of their actual coordinates, or what's more conventional is telling us what suburb they live in, for instance. So going back to that choropleth map idea. This is what I came up with. This was my visualisation. I actually used digital data to get this, so I got it from CARP, but I actually found there are a lot of advantages of using paper still. I find it very interactive. I don't think you need a screen to be interactive with data and visualisations. And I think you can actually pore over a map when it's in a paper format. You can get your highlighters out and, highlight things and actually have a good look at, investigate different things. At the moment, this is, yes, not digital. It can definitely be made into that format and put on the web and make it so it's more interactive. But this was my PhD, so I had limits on my time and money. So this is what I came up with. I'll try to explain this. So each point, basically each venue now, is now a line, which is a little bit crazy. But I found a line because a line can have a length, therefore it can have a temporal span. Okay, so we can actually give it, that length is now its lifetime of the cinema venue. With also that line you can have colour, and so you can give it an attribute to that colour. You also have line width and line style. And because I made a sort of a radial picture, we also had a central axis which will give us another attribute. So when we put all this information together, that's what it looks like. Is it usable? Depending on how many venues you have that you want to look at, it will definitely make a difference in your usability. But this is used as a starting point, and I'm sorry for it's not being very clear on the screen. So you can actually see areas of concentration. You can see areas where you have a lot of closures. You can see temporal clusters, you can see spatial clusters, and you can look at different attribute patterns and trends. This is the second one where we're looking at, if I can remember correctly, we're looking at openings and closures in cinema venues between, I think it's between 1950 and 70. And so we're actually looking at these venues here. The ones that are straight are the ones that are opening in that time. So yes, it is 50 and 70. So it is the ones that are straight are opening that time. The ones that are curved are closing during that time. The colour indicates, I've got it written down here so I remember, is actually the distance from the city. So our darker colours are our CBD venues, and our greener, yellowy colours are heading right out into more rural areas. So if you, my thing is that it rewards careful study, and that is something that I've used a lot to explain my work, is because it does take time to switch your brain around. You're no longer looking at a map, you're looking at a diagram. And so it's similar to the work that Gavin's done with network analysis. It looks very spatial, but they're not actually, locations on a map. But it's more about organising that data in a spatial way. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things you can ask of it, and things that will fuel research. So that's what I made it for, was for people like Deb to actually sit down in front of these things and say, oh, I didn't know that this relationship was clear, or they can then go on and use that to look at things in more depth. So this is just a closer view. So this is of the north of the city, and so coming from 1950. So we can see there's a lot of closures around 1959, 1960 in that area, and you can see by the colour of them that they're actually quite close to the city. They're in the sort of 1 to 5 kilometres classification. So there's something happening in the north there. And we can see that the ones that are opening, they generally don't start opening until around 65. There's not many ones opening before that. If you compare that to the east for the same one, if you have a look at that same area in the 1960s, now you're looking at more further distance from the city, so you're looking at more 20 to 50 kilometre cinemas that closed. And that obviously reflects the geography of Melbourne as well. But it definitely shows a pattern there as well. The colour represents distance from the CBD. The style is the primary purpose, so that's when we would look at things like drive-ins, or it's a theatre or a hall. So the dotted lines there are actually the drive-ins. The width is the size of the cinema company, if they're a chain or just a small company. And the axis is the capacity of that cinema. So we're representing multiple attributes all at the one time. I didn't want to create something that you had to click on to get more information, because that more information was actually really important in the trends and patterns. And you can't look at trends and patterns by investigating things individually. So this is the last one. This was looking at the cinema chains that were operating Melbourne at that time. So for instance, blue is the Hoyts venues there, and you can see that they weren't particularly successful. They really didn't go well. And then you can see the village starting to open up, which is the yellow, and for those, sorry about the screen for those. And they're starting to open up conveniently after the Hoyts sort of closed down. Here, so there's a little snapshot on the left there, just to give you more detail. And on the right here, we're looking at cinemas in particular. I think this is Greater Union, for instance. So you can actually, if this was in more automated process, you'd be able to query us and say, that's great, Alwyn, but could you just show me the venues that I'm interested in? Can you only show me Greater Union theatres? And then it'll be able to pop up for you in my lovely automated world. But because I don't know anything about programming, I stuck to AutoCAD. So this is an example of what you could do later on, and then you could say, could you show me that as well as Hoyts? And so then by cleaning it up, you can see the patterns that you want to see are a bit clearer. All right, that's it. In conclusion, I think it's really important that the thought needs to be given to the reasons why you're including spatial information in the first place. If you just simply want to put things on a map, that's fine, but if you actually want to get anything more out of it, you actually really need to think about how you're displaying that data and what you're going to use it for in the end. And also that geographic and spatial data does not always have to mean maps. That a big inspiration for me was the more information visualizations, such as what Gavin talked about. Those sorts of areas are really, really interesting in trying to communicate data to everyone. So that's it. Thanks very much.